My landlord handed me a rent increase for the third time this year, threatening eviction. I had just finished an 8-hour shift earning $9 an hour, smelling of antiseptic with only $37 in my account. I was ready to break down until a stranger called and said, "Don't pay another cent. This building is already yours." That was the moment I realized my family had been collecting rent on a home that actually belonged to me. My name is Charlotte Ross, and at 27 years old, I have learned that the American dream is just a hallucination caused by sleep deprivation and the fumes of industrial-grade disinfectant. I sat in the break room of Sunrise Animal Urgent Care, staring at the clock as the red digital numbers flickered from 6:59 to 7 in the morning. My shift was technically over, but the smell of the place stuck to me like a second skin. It was a cocktail of bleach, wet dog fur, and the distinct, sharp ammonia tang of cat urine that I had spent the last 40 minutes scrubbing off the exam room floor. I work the overnight shift at an emergency vet clinic in Harbor Falls, Ohio. It is the kind of job that sounds noble at parties until you actually have to do it. For $9 an hour, I do not just clean cages, I hold the hands of grown men weeping because their golden retriever ate a sock. I get screamed at by suburban mothers in yoga pants because their pet insurance lapsed, and they do not understand why we cannot perform a $3,000 surgery for free. I am the punchline to a joke about the working poor. Except nobody is laughing, least of all me. My back ached in a way that made me feel 50 years older than I was. I grabbed my bag, walked past the reception desk, and clocked out. There were no tips in this line of work. Nobody tosses a $5 bill to the girl who wipes up the vomit in the lobby. As I walked out into the gray, drizzling Ohio morning, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the notification I dreaded every 2 weeks. My paycheck had hit my account. I stopped on the sidewalk, unlocking my screen with a thumb cracked from constant hand-washing, and opened my banking app. The deposit was there, $720 for 2 weeks of graveyard shifts, but right below it was the automatic transfer that gutted me every single time. Household contribution transfer complete to Ruth Carver, $350, gone, just like that. My mother, Ruth, called it a contribution. She said it was my duty as a daughter to help the family, to pay back the years of sacrifice she and my Aunt Vivian had made raising me. She said the money went to the family pot, covering electricity bills, or perhaps the private Christian school tuition for my younger cousin, whom they insisted was gifted despite all evidence to the contrary. I had $37.14 left in my checking account to survive the next 14 days. I drove my rusted sedan back to Ridgeview Arms, the apartment complex where I had lived for 3 years. It was a block of red brick that had probably been nice in the 1970s, but now looked like a bruised tooth on the skyline of Harbor Falls. The elevator had been broken since November. It was now February. I trudged up 4 flights of stairs, my legs burning, ignoring the black mold blooming in the corner of the third-floor landing like a dark nebula. My apartment was Unit 4B. It smelled of damp drywall and old cooking grease from the neighbors. I did not even bother taking off my scrubs. I just collapsed onto the sofa I had bought from a thrift store 3 years ago. A spring dug into my hip, but I was too exhausted to move. All I wanted was 5 hours of sleep before I had to wake up and figure out which bill to pay late. I had just closed my eyes when the knocking started. It was not a polite knock. It was a heavy, authoritative pounding, the kind that demands attention. I groaned, pulling a throw blanket over my head, hoping they would go away. The pounding got louder. "Management, open up. Ms. Ross." My stomach dropped. I knew that voice. I dragged myself off the couch, my head swimming with fatigue, and opened the door. Owen Pratt stood there. Owen was the property manager for Northbrook Living, LLC, the faceless company that managed Ridgeview Arms. He was wearing a navy blue polo shirt that was too tight around the stomach, with the Northbrook logo embroidered in white thread on the chest. He held a clipboard in one hand and a sheer look of boredom on his face. "Morning, Charlotte," he said. Not waiting for an invitation, he thrust a piece of paper toward my chest. "Notice of rent adjustment, effective the 1st of next month." I took the paper, my hands trembling slightly. I scanned the bold text, my heart hammered against my ribs. "Owen," I said, my voice cracking from lack of use. "This says the rent is going up by $250. That is a 25% increase." Owen shrugged, already looking at the next door down the hall. "Market rates, Charlotte, property taxes went up. Plus, corporate is planning to redo the roof this summer. Materials are not cheap." "The roof?" I asked, feeling a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. "Owen, the radiator in my bedroom has not worked since Christmas. There is mold in the hallway that is practically a science experiment. You guys have not fixed a single thing in 2 years, and now you want another $250? Owen finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, devoid of any empathy. He looked at me like I was another mess on the floor, something inconvenient that needed to be mopped up. "Look," he said, his voice dropping to a patronizing drawl. "If you cannot afford the lifestyle here, that is not my problem. Northbrook runs a business, not a charity. You sign the lease addendum by Friday, or you vacate by the 30th. Simple as that." "I cannot afford this," I whispered. "I literally cannot afford this. I make $9 an hour." Owen let out a short, sharp laugh. "Then maybe get a better job, or move out. Plenty of people need affordable housing. If you want cheap, go sleep on the street. I heard the underpass is free." He turned and walked away, knocking on my neighbor's door with the same rhythmic violence. I stood there in the doorway, the paper shaking in my hand. $250. If I paid this, I would have to stop eating. I would have to walk to work to save gas money. I closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down until I hit the floor. I did the only thing I could think of. I called my mother. Ruth picked up on the second ring. I could hear the hum of daytime television in the background. "Mom," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice and failing. "It is Charlotte." "Oh, Charlotte," she sighed. "I was just telling your Aunt Vivian that you have not called in days. We worry, working those ungodly hours." "Mom, the landlord is raising the rent," I said, cutting through the pleasantries. $250 a month. I cannot do it. I just sent you the household contribution. I have $37 left. Is there any way at all you could send some of it back, just for this month, until I can find a second job?" The line went silent. Then came the sigh. It was a long, disappointed sound that I had been hearing since I was 6 years old. "Charlotte," Ruth said, her voice taking on that sharp, pious tone she used when she felt morally superior. "We have discussed this. The contribution is not a loan. It is your obligation. Your Aunt Vivian and I sacrificed everything to raise you after your father left. We put clothes on your back. We fed you." "I know, Mom. And now you want to take money away from the family," she interrupted. "From your cousin's education. The electric bill is due. Charlotte, do you want us to sit in the dark because you cannot manage your own finances?" "It is not about managing finances," I cried, hot tears stinging my eyes. "It is $250 I am drowning here." "God gives us challenges to test our faith," she said simply. "Maybe you need to pray on it, or ask for more shifts. We have all had to make sacrifices. Charlotte, do not be selfish. Just make sure the transfer clears. Okay, we are counting on it." She hung up. I stared at the phone, the screen blurring through my tears. Selfish, that was the word she always used. A second later, a text message popped up from Aunt Vivian. "Heard about the rent. Tough luck. Just remember, keep your head down and work hard. If you are a good girl and do your part for the family now, there will be a place for you in the will later. A little piece of the family assets. Do not mess it up by being greedy." I wanted to throw the phone through the wall. The family assets. They always dangled that in front of me like a carrot on a stick. Someday, if I was obedient enough, if I paid enough into the pot, if I suffered enough, maybe I would get a crumb. But right now, I did not care about someday. I cared about tonight. I cared about not living in my car. I looked at the paper Owen had given me. If I did not sign it, I was out in 30 days. If I signed it, I was signing away my ability to eat 3 meals a day. With a shaking hand, I grabbed a pen from the counter. I flattened the paper against the linoleum floor. I felt small. I felt like the burden my mother always implied I was. I felt like a failure. I signed my name, Charlotte M. Ross. I dropped the pen and pulled my knees to my chest, burying my face in my arms. The sobbing started then. Ugly, gasping sounds that echoed in the empty kitchen. I cried for the $9 an hour. I cried for the $37 in my bank. I cried for the fact that my own mother cared more about her electric bill than whether her daughter had a roof over her head. I was trapped. I was paying half my paycheck to a family that despised me, and the other half to a landlord who mocked me. Then, my phone buzzed against the floor. I wiped my nose on my sleeve and glanced at it. I expected it to be Owen, or maybe Ruth calling back to scold me for my tone. The screen lit up. Private caller. I almost let it go to voicemail. I did not have the energy for a telemarketer or a scammer telling me my car warranty had expired, but something made me reach for it. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe it was just a need to hear a voice that was not telling me I was worthless. I slid my thumb across the screen. "Hello," I rasped. "Charlotte." The voice on the other end stopped me cold. It was male, deep, and aged, like rough gravel, but it was not weak. It was incredibly lucid, sharp as a razor. I froze. I had not heard that voice in 15 years, not since the day my mother screamed at him to get off our porch and never come back. The family legend said he was senile. They said he had cut us off because he was a cruel, miserly old man who hated his own blood. "Grandpa," I whispered. "Walter." He did not offer a greeting. He did not ask how I was. He did not offer false sympathy for the tears he could surely hear in my voice. "Listen to me very carefully. Charlotte," Walter Kane said. His tone was not warm, but it commanded obedience. "I know Owen Pratt just left your apartment. I know he gave you a paper to sign." My breath hitched. How do you know that?" "Do not pay them another cent," he said. Each word was heavy, distinct. "Do not send your mother the contribution, and do not give Northbrook Living a single dollar for that rent increase." "Grandpa, I have to," I stammered, panic rising again. "If I do not pay, they will evict me. I have nowhere to go. Mom said—" "Your mother is a liar," he cut in, "and Owen Pratt is a thief." The line crackled. Outside, rain began to lash against the single-pane window of my kitchen. "Tonight," Walter said, his voice dropping an octave. "Do not sleep in that apartment, not if you want to keep it." "Keep it?" I asked, confused. "I do not own it, Grandpa. I rent it. It is a dump." "You really have no idea. Do you—" He let out a sound that might have been a scoff or a sigh of frustration. "Meet me at Harbor Falls Self-Storage on Route 9, Unit 402. The code is your birthday." "Wait," I said, standing up, clutching the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "Why? What is going on? The family says you are sick. They say you are gone." "I am not gone," Walter said. "I have been watching. I have been counting." "Counting what?" "Every dollar they stole from you," he replied. "Get to the storage unit. Charlotte, pack a bag. The game changes tonight." "Grandpa, please," I begged, looking at the signed rent notice on the floor. "I am tired. I am broke. I cannot play games." There was a pause on the line. For a second, the hardness in his voice seemed to crack, revealing something ancient and sad underneath. "I have waited for you for 6 months," he said. 6 months of watching you scrub floors and pay bills that are not yours. I needed to be sure you were not like them. Now I know. Know what? That you are the only one worth saving," he said. "Now move." The line went dead. I stood in the silence of my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear. My heart was pounding a rhythm that felt entirely different from the panic of 5 minutes ago. It was fear. Yes, but it was something else too. "Don't pay another cent. This building is already yours." I looked at the damp stain on the ceiling. I looked at the peeling linoleum. I looked at the notice demanding $250 more for the privilege of living in squalor. My mother wanted her contribution. Owen wanted his rent. I grabbed my backpack. I shoved 2 changes of clothes, my toothbrush, and the signed rent notice into it. I did not know what Walter was talking about. I did not know if he was crazy or if this was some cruel prank. But as I walked out the door, leaving the lights off and the heat off, I realized one thing. I had $37 to my name. I had absolutely nothing left to lose. I locked the door to Unit 4B, walked down the moldy hallway, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like someone who had just been handed a weapon, even if I did not know how to use it yet. The drive to Harbor Falls self-storage took 40 minutes. I drove in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The adrenaline from the phone call had faded, leaving behind a cold, vibrating exhaustion. I was still wearing my scrubs, which smelled faintly of bleach and the generic oatmeal shampoo we used on the dogs. I must have looked like a walking disaster. Dark circles under my eyes, hair pulled back in a messy knot that was slowly unraveling. The storage facility was located on the edge of town, past the abandoned textile mill and the stretch of road where the streetlights had burned out years ago. It was a fortress of corrugated metal and chain-link fencing, sterile and imposing under the gray afternoon sky. I pulled up to the keypad at the main gate. Walter had told me the code was my birthday. I rolled down the window and punched in the numbers. 0, 6, 1, 4, 9, 6. The screen blinked green instantly. A robotic message scrolled across the small digital display. Welcome, Charlotte M. Ross. I stared at the screen. My name was already in the system, not as a guest, but as an authorized user. I had not spoken to my grandfather in 15 years, yet he had my name programmed into a security gate at a storage facility on the outskirts of town. The gate slid open with a heavy mechanical hum, and I drove through, the gravel crunching loudly under my tires. Unit 402 was located in the back row, a climate-controlled section that cost more per month than my car insurance. I parked the car and got out, the wind whipping my scrub top around my waist. I found the unit door. It was locked with a heavy-duty padlock, but there was no key in sight. I looked around, confused, until I saw a small, magnetic, hide-a-key box stuck to the metal frame of the door. Just above eye level, I reached up, pulled it down, and slid the cover open. Inside was a silver key. I unlocked the padlock and rolled the metal door upward. It rattled in its tracks, the sound echoing in the empty alleyway. I expected to see the usual detritus of a forgotten life: old mattresses, broken lamps, boxes of holiday decorations that smelled like mildew. That was what storage units were for. But as the door rose, revealing the interior, the breath caught in my throat. It looked like the archives of a law firm. The space was pristine. The concrete floor was swept clean. Along the walls stood rows of industrial metal shelving units, floor to ceiling, packed with identical white banker's boxes. In the center of the room was a folding table with a single lamp, which was currently off. The air inside did not smell like dust or rot. It smelled of paper and dry, conditioned air. I stepped inside and pulled the string for the overhead light. The fluorescent bulb flickered to life, casting a stark white glow over the room. I walked to the nearest shelf. The boxes were labeled in neat, black marker. Tax returns, 1998. Property acquisitions, 2004. Northbrook correspondence. My eyes scanned the labels until they landed on a box at eye level. It was marked simply, C. Rent. My initials. I pulled the box down. It was heavy. I carried it to the folding table, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sat down on the metal folding chair and lifted the lid. Inside were manila folders, dozens of them. I pulled out the one on top. It was a copy of a lease agreement. My lease agreement? I recognized the font. I recognized the coffee stain on the corner of the page where I had spilled my mug the day I signed it 3 years ago. But as I turned the pages, something was wrong. On my copy at home, the line for landlord owner was signed by Owen Pratt on behalf of Northbrook Living LLC. I looked at the document in my hand. The signature was there, but above it, the owner of record line was filled out in typed text that I had never seen before. Owner Kane Residential Trust. Beneficiary Charlotte M. Ross. I blinked, sure that the lack of sleep was making me hallucinate. I read it again. Beneficiary Charlotte M. Ross. I dug deeper into the box. There were bank statements. Hundreds of pages of transaction records from a bank called Sovereign Mercantile. I pulled out a statement from last month. The top of the statement read, Kane Residential Trust Asset ID, Ridgeview Arms. I ran my finger down the transaction list. Income Rent Unit 4B, $850. That was my rent. That was the money I scraped together every single month. The check I handed to Owen Pratt with shaking hands, terrified it would bounce. Below that was an outgoing line item, management fee Northbrook Living $85. Owen took 10%. That was standard, but it was the next line that made the room spin. Distribution Household Support. Ruth Carver, $4,200. Distribution Household Support. Vivian Holt, $2,100. I gasped. The sound loud and sharp in the quiet room. $4,200. Every single month. I scrambled to find the previous month's statement, and the one before that. It was the same pattern. The trust collected the rent from the building, my building, apparently paid the property taxes, paid the water bill, paid Owen his management fee, and then funneled the surplus cash directly into the bank accounts of my mother and my aunt. I did the math in my head. My mother was receiving over $4,000 a month from this trust. My aunt was getting half that. And yet, every 2 weeks, my mother demanded $350 from my meager paycheck as a household contribution. They were double-dipping. No, they were not just double-dipping. They were bleeding me dry while living off an asset that legally listed me as the beneficiary. I felt a wave of nausea. I remembered the phone call this morning. The electric bill is due. Charlotte, we are counting on it. She had $4,000 coming in from the building I lived in, and she was squeezing me for $300 to pay her light bill. I shoved the statements aside, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and horror. I dug to the bottom of the box. There was a heavy dark blue binder there. The cover was embossed with silver lettering Kane Residential Charter 2001. I opened it. It was full of dense legal jargon, pages upon pages of bylaws and trust stipulations. But someone, Walter, presumably had used a yellow highlighter to mark a specific section. Article 14, Section 3. I leaned over the table, reading the highlighted text, the tenant proxy clause. The legalese was thick, but the meaning was clear enough for me to understand. In the event that a direct lineage beneficiary is residing within a trust property and is subject to standard tenant lease agreements, rent collection, and lack of management authority. I skipped to the conditions. Said beneficiary may claim full voting proxy and executive control of the specific asset if they can demonstrate 1/6 consecutive months of independent income derived outside of any Kane family enterprise, 2 documented proof of treatment as a standard tenant, including rent payments and lack of special privileges. Paperclipped to the page was a small, white index card. The handwriting was jagged but strong, done in black ink. Activated upon completion of the 6-month period. You needed to be clean. Charlotte, you needed to owe them nothing. I stared at the card. Walter had not abandoned me. He had been waiting for the clock to run out. He needed me to struggle. He needed me to pay rent. He needed me to be treated like a stranger in my own inheritance because that was the trigger for the clause. If my mother had given me a free apartment, if she had treated me like a daughter instead of a tenant, this clause would never have applied. Their greed was the key that unlocked the door. I closed the binder, my heart racing. I felt like I was looking at a weapon I did not know how to fire. I reached for the next box on the shelf. This one was labeled Internal Emails, RHVH. I pulled the lid off. It was full of printed emails. I picked up a stack from last year. From Vivian Holt to Ruth Carver. Subject Ridgeview. Charlotte Ruth. Owen says she is asking about the mold in the hallway again. I told him to ignore it. If we fix it, We have to raise the capital expenditure report, and that cuts into the monthly draw. Just tell her to buy a dehumidifier. Keep her there. Though, as long as she is paying rent like a normal tenant, the IRS sees Ridgeview as a standard investment property. If she leaves, we lose the occupancy rating. Plus, the rent money looks good on the ledger. Clean income. I crumpled the paper in my fist. Clean income. That was what I was to them. Not a niece, not a daughter, a line item, a way to make the books look balanced. I read another one. From Ruth Carver to Vivian Holt. Subject re. The contribution. She sent the money. It is not much, but it covers the lease on the new SUV. I told her it was for the electric. She is so guilt-ridden she did not even ask to see the bill. It is better this way. If she knew about the trust distributions, she would just waste it. You know how she is. She has no head for business. We are protecting the asset for her own good. Protecting the asset. They were buying SUVs with money generated by the roach-infested building I lived in, while I ate instant noodles and worked the graveyard shift. At the bottom of the email box, there was a small plastic bag. Inside was a USB drive labeled Roof Fund Audio. I held the drive in my palm. It felt cold. Roof Fund. Owen had said the rent increase was for the roof. If the emails were anything to go by, there was no roof repair planned. I did not have a computer with me to check the audio, but the label alone sent a chill down my spine. Audio meant recordings. Audio meant conversations they thought no one would ever hear. I sat back in the metal chair, surrounded by the paper trail of my own exploitation. The silence of the storage unit felt heavy, pressing in on my eardrums. I had spent my entire adult life thinking I was the failure of the family. I thought I was the one who could not get it right, the one who needed their charity to survive. But the truth was sitting right here on this table. I was not the charity case. I was the bank. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I jumped, knocking the blue binder onto the floor. I pulled the phone out. It was a text message from the same private number that had called me this morning. If you have found Article 14.3, then you understand what is at stake. You have a choice. You can go back to your apartment, pay the rent increase, and be a good tenant, or you can come to me, and we can burn their little kingdom to the ground. Decide. I looked at the phone, then I looked at the lease agreement with my name listed as the beneficiary. I thought about Owen Pratt's smug face when he told me to go sleep on the street. I thought about my mother's voice telling me I was selfish for wanting to keep my own paycheck. I thought about the nights I spent shivering because the radiator was broken, while my mother drove a new SUV paid for by my rent, the sadness I had felt earlier, the crushing weight of poverty and hopelessness, began to evaporate. In its place, something else was forming. It was cold and hard, like the steel shelves surrounding me. I picked up the blue binder from the floor and placed it back on the table. I put the lease agreement and the bank statements into my backpack. I slipped the USB drive into my zipped pocket. I was done crying. I was done begging. I stood up, turned off the lamp, and walked out of the unit. I pulled the heavy metal door down and snapped the padlock shut. I typed a reply to the number, "I am coming." I walked back to my car, the gravel crunching under my boots sounding like the ticking of a clock. The game was over. Or rather, the game had just begun. And for the first time, I knew the rules. The Blue Lantern Diner was not the kind of place you went to celebrate a family reunion. It was a squat, aluminum-sided building off the interstate, wedged between a tire repair shop and a motel that rented rooms by the hour. The air inside smelled permanently of burnt bacon grease and diesel fumes. It was a place for long-haul truckers and third-shift factory workers, people who ate quickly and tipped in crumpled $1 bills. I walked in. The bell above the door chiming with a cheerful sound that clashed with the grim atmosphere. I was still in my scrubs. My hair was a disaster. I felt like an open nerve, hypersensitive to the noise of cutlery scraping against ceramic plates and the low hum of the refrigerator case. I saw him immediately. Walter Kane sat in a booth at the far back, away from the windows. I had not seen him in 15 years, not since I was 12 years old, but he looked exactly as I remembered, only sharper. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that looked out of place against the cracked red vinyl of the booth. It was old, clearly cut from a fashion era long past, but it fit him with architectural precision. He did not look frail. He looked like a statue carved from granite that had been left out in the weather weathered. Yes, but immovable. A black cane with a silver handle rested against the table. He did not smile when he saw me. He did not stand up to offer a hug. He simply lifted a hand and gestured to the empty seat opposite him. It was the gesture of a CEO summoning a junior associate, not a grandfather greeting his granddaughter. I slid into the booth. The table between us felt miles wide. "You look tired, Charlotte," he said. His voice was the same deep, gravelly rumble I had heard on the phone. It was not an observation of sympathy. It was a statement of fact. "I worked all night," I said, my voice sounding thin in my own ears. "And then I spent 2 hours in a storage unit reading about how my mother is robbing me." Walter nodded once, slowly. He picked up a ceramic mug of black coffee and took a sip. "Good. You read the files. That saves us time." "Is that all you have to say?" I asked, feeling a sudden flash of anger cut through my exhaustion. "You knew. You knew they were taking the rent money. You knew the building belonged to the trust with my name on it." "I knew," Walter said calmly. "Then why?" I demanded, leaning forward. "Why did you let me live like that? I have been eating ramen noodles for 3 years. I scrub dog vomit for $9 an hour. I begged them for help. Grandpa, I begged them. And they told me I was a burden while they were spending $4,000 a month of my money." Walter set the cup down. His eyes, pale blue and unblinking, locked onto mine. "I had to know," he said. "Know what?" "I had to know if you were one of them," he replied. "Or if you were just their victim." He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a folded napkin, smoothing it out on the table. 6 months ago, I stepped back from the day-to-day oversight of the Kane Residential Trust, he began, his tone clinical. "I gave Ruth and Vivian limited management privileges. I wanted to see what they would do when they thought no one was watching. I wanted to see how they handled the assets, and more importantly, I wanted to see how they treated the one family member who had no power. I was a lab rat," I whispered. "You used me as a test subject." "I used you as a litmus test," he corrected. "If Ruth had used that money to help you, if she had waived your rent, if she had treated you like a daughter, we would not be having this conversation. But she did not. She saw a vulnerability, and she exploited it. She saw her own child as a revenue stream." He leaned back, his gaze hardening. "My father built this portfolio to shelter his family. Ruth and Vivian have turned it into a weapon to control them. I needed proof, and I needed you to be angry enough to do something about it." "I am not just angry," I said, my hands shaking under the table. "I am humiliated." "Good," Walter said. "Humiliation is a powerful fuel. Use it." He signaled to the waitress, a tired woman with frizzy hair, and ordered another coffee without asking if I wanted anything. Then he turned his attention back to me. "You saw the binder. You saw Article 14.3. The tenant proxy clause," I said. "Do you know why I wrote that clause?" he asked. I shook my head. 20 years ago, I had a nephew, your cousin, David. You probably do not remember him. He was a gentle boy, an artist. He lived in one of our buildings in Chicago. He fell on hard times, lost his job. My brother, who ran the trust back then, evicted him. He threw his own son out on the street in November because David did not fit the image of a Kane. He was not successful. He was not useful at dinner parties." Walter paused, his jaw tightening. "David died of exposure 3 weeks later. He froze to death in a bus shelter while his father sat in a heated penthouse paid for by the family trust." A chill that had nothing to do with the diner's air conditioning ran down my spine. "After David died, I rewrote the charter," Walter continued. "I added Article 14.3. It is a poison pill. Charlotte, it stipulates that if a direct heir is treated as a standard tenant if they are charged rent, if they are subject to eviction, if they are denied the support of the family infrastructure, then they are no longer just an heir. They become a creditor. And if they can prove 6 months of independent survival, they earn the right to take over the voting proxy for that asset. He pointed a finger at me. Ruth and Vivian think that by charging you rent, they are keeping you down. They think they are keeping the books clean. But in their greed, they have handed you the keys to the kingdom. You are not a charity case anymore. Charlotte, you are a tenant who has been defrauded by her landlord, and that gives you more power in court than a dutiful daughter ever has. He gestured toward the door. A woman walked in. She was about 40, wearing a sharp blazer and carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than my car. She slid into the booth next to Walter without waiting for an invitation. "This is Allison Rowe," Walter said. "She is a forensic paralegal. She does not work for the family firm. She works for me. And if you agree, she works for you." Allison nodded to me. Her expression was professional, serious. "Ms. Ross, I have reviewed the documents from the storage unit. You have a very strong case for a constructive trust claim, but the proxy vote is the faster route. We can freeze their authority over the Ridgeview building within 30 days. 30 days, I asked. Why 30 days? Walter placed a single sheet of paper on the table. It was a simple agreement, typed on plain white paper, because the clause requires 6 full months of documented independence and tenant status. Walter said, "You are currently at 5 months and 29 days since the last time you accepted a gift from your mother, which was a birthday check for $50 that you never cashed." "I lost it," I mumbled. "Lucky for you," Allison said. "If you had cashed it, the clock would have reset. Financial dependence nullifies the clause." Walter tapped the table with his index finger. "Here is the deal. Charlotte, I am not going to give you money. I am not going to write you a check to pay off your debts. If I do that, you become a dependent again, and the clause fails. You lose your leverage. So what are you offering?" I asked. "A seat at the table." Walter said, "If you can last 30 more days, you have to go back to that apartment. You have to pay the rent increase Owen gave you. You have to keep working your job at the vet clinic. You cannot accept a single penny from Ruth, Vivian, or anyone else in the family. You have to be completely, undeniably independent." "You want me to pay the rent increase?" I asked, incredulous. "I literally do not have the money. Grandpa, I have $37. "Then pick up extra shifts," Walter said, his voice devoid of pity. "Sell something. Do whatever you have to do, but you must pay that rent. The moment that check clears, it becomes the final piece of evidence. It proves they are price gouging a beneficiary. It proves malice." He leaned forward, his face inches from mine. "They will attack you, Charlotte. They will smell that something is wrong. Ruth will try to guilt you. Vivian will try to scare you. Owen will try to intimidate you. They will attack you where you are weakest. They will go after your money, your job, and your reputation. They will tell everyone you are ungrateful. They will call you crazy." I looked down at the table. The thought of facing my mother, of listening to her guilt trips while knowing she was stealing from me, made my stomach turn. "I do not know if I can do it," I admitted softly. "I do not want to destroy the family. Grandpa, she is still my mom. If I do this, if I take the building from her, she will never forgive me." "She has not forgiven you for being born," Walter said brutally. I flinched. "Listen to me," Walter said, his voice softening just a fraction. "You think you are protecting the peace, but there is no peace. There is only silence where you are being eaten alive. Justice is structural. Charlotte, you are not destroying the family. You are fixing the foundation. You are changing the structure so that they cannot abuse you anymore. If they cannot survive without exploiting their own children, then they do not deserve to survive as they are." He pushed the paper toward me. It was an engagement letter for Allison's services and a formal declaration of intent to trigger Article 14.3. "If you sign this, Allison starts building the wall of evidence. We document everything, every text message, every voicemail, every transaction. But you have to be the bait. You have to stay in the trap for 30 more days without snapping." I looked at Allison. She gave me a small, encouraging nod. "We will be with you in the background. Charlotte, we will be recording everything, but you have to walk through the fire alone." I thought about the cold apartment. I thought about the household contribution. I thought about the text from Aunt Vivian telling me to be a good girl, so I could get a crumb of the inheritance. I was done being a good girl. I picked up the pen lying on the table. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen. It felt cold in my hand. 30 days, I said. "And then what?" "And then," Walter said, "we call a board meeting, and you take back what is yours." I uncapped the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of grease and stale coffee, and signed my name, Charlotte M. Ross. The ink was dark and permanent. Walter took the paper back and folded it neatly, placing it into his pocket. He did not congratulate me. He did not smile. He signaled the waitress for the check. "One last thing," Walter said as he stood up. Leaning heavily on his cane, he looked down at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of pride in his eyes. It was fierce and terrifying. "From this moment on, every time they demand something from you," he said, "every time Ruth tells you to sacrifice for the good of the family, every time Vivian tells you to be grateful for the roof over your head, I want you to ask yourself one question, and I want you to ask it until you feel it in your bones." He paused, letting the noise of the diner fade away until all I could hear was his voice. "Ask yourself, who is really paying for this roof?" He turned and walked out of the diner, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the linoleum floor, leaving me sitting in the booth with 30 days of hell ahead of me and a war to win. For the next 72 hours, I did not sleep, or at least, I did not sleep in a bed. I napped in 10-minute bursts on a beanbag chair in the corner of Allison Rowe's home office, waking up with the taste of stale coffee in my mouth and the hum of a laser printer in my ears. Allison lived in a converted loft downtown, a space that was equal parts living area and war room. She had taken the contents of the storage unit, the chaotic, painful debris of my life and my family's deception, and turned it into a timeline that stretched across 3 whiteboards. She was a machine. She did not offer pity. She offered organization. We started with the money. Allison sat at her desk, 3 monitors glowing in the dim light, her fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard. I sat next to her, holding a highlighter, my eyes burning as I cross-referenced bank statements. "Follow the flow," Allison said, her voice crisp. "Do not look at the names. Look at the numbers. Emotion lies. Charlotte, math does not." We traced the path of every single dollar. It was nauseatingly simple. Step 1, I paid $850 in rent to Northbrook Living. Step 2, Northbrook took their $85 cut and transferred the rest to the Kane Residential Trust account. Step 3, the trust paid the property taxes and the water bill for Ridgeview Arms. Step 4, the trust issued a monthly distribution labeled Household Support to Ruth Carver and Vivian Holt, but that was just the surface. Allison dug deeper. She pulled up the tax filings for the trust, which Walter had provided in the digital dump. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a recurring expense line item. "Roof maintenance fund, $2,000 a month, every month, for the last 4 years. The roof has not been touched since I moved in," I said. "It leaks every time it rains hard." "Exactly," Allison said. She clicked on the vendor name associated with the payments, Apex Structural Solutions, LLC. With a few more clicks, she pulled up the corporate registration for Apex Structural Solutions. The registered agent was not a contractor. It was a lawyer in Delaware, but the mailing address for invoices. It was a P.O. box in Harbor Falls. "Recognize this address?" Allison asked. I squinted at the screen. "That is the mail center next to the nail salon where Aunt Vivian goes every Tuesday." "Bingo," Allison said. "It is a shell company. Vivian is billing the trust for roof repairs that never happen, paying the checks to a company she controls, and pocketing the cash. That is $24,000 a year. Tax-free. Stolen directly from the building's maintenance budget." I felt sick. That money could have fixed the boiler. It could have fixed the mold. Instead, it was likely sitting in Vivian's offshore account or hanging in her closet in the form of designer coats. But the numbers were only half the story. The real horror was in the audio. I picked up the USB drive labeled Roof Fund Audio that I had found in the storage unit. Allison plugged it into her sound system. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. Gripping the arms of my chair, the audio crackled to life. There was the sound of clinking glass, the low murmur of a crowd, and a bass line from a jukebox. It sounded like a bar. Then, Vivian's voice cut through the noise. It was slurred slightly, arrogant and loud. "Worried? Why would I be worried? Owen, she is a mouse, a frightened little mouse." Then Owen Pratt's voice, greasy and nervous. "She asked about the increase. Viv, she was crying. She said she is broke. If she moves out, we lose the tenant proxy status. The trust charter requires a family member in residence to keep the tax liabilities low on that building." "She is not going anywhere," Vivian laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. "She thinks she is lucky we let her live there. I told her the family is struggling. I told her we all have to sacrifice. She ate it up. Just keep squeezing her. Owen, increase the rent. Tell her it is the market. She will pay it. She would rather starve than disappoint her mother." I closed my eyes as the recording ended. The room was silent, save for the hum of the computer. "She would rather starve," I repeated, my voice hollow. "That is the smoking gun for malice," Allison said, saving the file to a secure folder. "They are not just negligent landlords, Charlotte. They are actively conspiring to manipulate you to maintain a tax loophole. They need you in that building to keep their taxes down. But they treat you like dirt to keep you submissive." She turned to the whiteboard and uncapped a red marker. She drew a line down the center. "We are going to build the Comparative Lifestyle Index," she said. "This is how we prove to the board that the beneficiary you is being systematically deprived while the trustees them are looting the estate." Column A was labeled Ruth and Vivian. Allison began taping printouts to the board. A receipt for a week-long vacation to Cabo San Lucas, paid for by the trust debit card under Business Development. A lease agreement for a brand-new SUV, listed as company vehicle, a renovation invoice for my mother's kitchen, listing granite countertops and a wine fridge, categorized as office improvements. Column B was labeled Charlotte. We taped up my bank statements, a transaction for $12 at a gas station, a receipt for generic ibuprofen for my back pain because I could not afford physical therapy, a transaction for $3 at a grocery store for instant noodles, and of course, the monthly rent check. The visual was striking. On the left, luxury fueled by fraud. On the right, survival fueled by desperation. "This is powerful," Allison said, stepping back. "But we need more. We need the social aspect. Article 14.3 requires proof that you were treated as a tenant, not family. We need to prove you were excluded." I pulled out my phone. "I have the texts." We spent the next 4 hours downloading and cataloging every message my mother and aunt had sent me over the last 6 months. Mom, God is watching us. Charlotte, sacrifice is the holiest form of love. Send the contribution by 5 today. The lights are flickering. Aunt Vivian, do not bother coming to the Easter brunch until 2 o'clock. We are discussing business first, and it would just bore you. Bring ice when you come. Allison highlighted the timestamps. They invite you after the meal, she noted. They ask you to bring supplies like a caterer. They demand money with religious guilt trips. Is that enough? I asked. It is good, Allison said, but I want third-party confirmation. We need someone outside the bubble. I thought about Ridgeview Arms. There is Mark, I said. Mark Ellis. He lives in Unit 5C, right above me. He is a freelance videographer. He is always filming stuff in the hallway for his vlog. We called Mark on speaker. He was hesitant at first, worried about getting evicted by Owen, until I told him I was working with a legal team to investigate Northbrook Living. Oh, I have footage, Mark said, his voice crackling over the line. Pratt is a nightmare. Hold on. Let me check my cloud drive. 10 minutes later, an email arrived. It contained a video file dated 3 weeks ago. We played it on the big monitor. The angle was high, shot from the stairwell looking down into the 4th-floor hallway. In the video, I was standing by my door, still in my scrubs, looking exhausted. Owen Pratt was towering over me, waving a clipboard in my face. "You are 1 day late, Ross," Owen was screaming. His face was red. "I do not care if your check has not cleared. I want the late fee. $50? Cash? Now." In the video, I shrank back. "Owen, please, I get paid tomorrow." "Not my problem," Owen yelled. "You pay, or I put a notice on your door telling the whole building you are a deadbeat." Allison paused the video. She opened a second window and pulled up the bank records for that exact day. "Look at the timestamp," she said. 1:14 in the afternoon. She pointed to the bank ledger. At 1:14 p.m. on that same day, the trust account received a transfer of $850 from Northbrook. Your rent was already paid. Owen had the money. He was screaming at you for a $50 late fee on a check he had already deposited. "He was performing," I said, realizing the cruelty of it. "He enjoyed it." "He was establishing dominance," Allison corrected, "and he was creating a record of you being a problem tenant in case they ever needed to evict you for real. This video is gold. Charlotte, it proves a hostile living environment created by the trustee's agent." Then came the final piece of the puzzle. Allison had hired a digital forensic specialist named Dev Patel. Dev was a quiet, intense guy who worked for the local courthouse, but did freelance data analysis on the side. He arrived at the loft around 8 in the evening, carrying a laptop covered in stickers. "I scraped the metadata from your family's social media accounts," Dev said, plugging into the main screen. "Facebook, Instagram, even your cousin's TikTok. I went back 5 years. He pulled up a grid of photos. They were all family gatherings. Thanksgiving, Christmas, 4th of July barbecues. "What do you see?" Dev asked. "I see my family having dinner," I said. "Look closer," Dev said. "Where are you?" I scanned the photos. In the first one, everyone was seated around a massive turkey. I was in the background, blurred, standing at the sink washing a pot. In the second one, a birthday party for my cousin. Everyone was on the patio toasting. I was visible through the sliding glass door, inside the kitchen, refilling a dip bowl. Dev clicked a few keys. "I ran a facial recognition algorithm to track your positioning relative to the center of celebration, basically, the dinner table or the cake." A graph appeared on the screen. It showed a flat line. "You are statistically never at the table," Dev said. "In 94% of the photos posted by your mother or aunt where you are present in the frame. You are standing, serving, or cleaning. You are never seated. You are effectively staff." He then played a time-lapse video he had constructed. It morphed the photos together chronologically. It was heartbreaking to watch. Years of my life flashed by in seconds. The seasons changed, the food changed, the people aged, but the composition remained exactly the same. The family sat. They laughed, they ate, and I was always a ghost in the periphery, a blur of movement in the background, holding a tray or washing a dish. "The invisible tenant," Allison whispered. "That is the name of the file." She compiled it all. The lease, the bank statements, the shell company records, the audio of the conspiracy, the video of the harassment, and the metadata analysis of my exclusion. It was a 15-page dossier of absolute, verifiable abuse. It was a wall of evidence that no amount of motherly love or misunderstanding could breach. While we were finalizing the file, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the secure email server Walter had set up for us. "Walter made a move," I said, reading the subject line. Walter had sent a formal request to the board of Kane Residential for an internal audit of operational expenses regarding the Ridgeview Arms asset. He did not mention me. He did not mention the clause. He just asked for the numbers. "That will spook them," Allison said. Almost immediately, the fallout began. My phone lit up with a text from Mom. "Why is Grandpa asking about the building? Did you say something to him?" I did not reply. Then, Allison's system flagged a new email in the intercepted folder. It was from Aunt Vivian to Mom. I leaned in to read it. Subject code read Ruth. "The old man is sniffing around. He wants to see the maintenance logs for Ridgeview. If he sees the Apex invoices, we might have a problem. But that is not the worst part." I looked up the trust charter again. If Charlotte actually understands what Article 14.3 means, she is dangerous. She has been working that vet job for almost 6 months. If she can prove she is independent, she can kick us out of the seat with her $9 job. We need to get her out of that apartment. If she is not a tenant, the clause does not apply. Tell Owen to ramp up the pressure. Make her leave. I stared at the screen. "They know," I said. "They know about the clause. They have known the whole time." "They fear you," Allison said, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "They are terrified that the girl with the $9 job is going to topple their empire." "Should we send the file now?" I asked, my hand hovering over the mouse. "Should we end this?" Allison shook her head. She placed her hand over mine. "No," she said. "Walter said 30 days. We need them to panic. Panic makes people sloppy. Vivian just admitted in writing that she wants to force you out to avoid the clause. That is intent to defraud. Let them squeeze you. Charlotte, let them try to break you. Because every time they strike now, they are just adding another nail to their own coffin." I looked at the dossier on the screen. The invisible tenant. I thought about the years I spent thinking I was worthless. I thought about the cold nights. I thought about the ghost in the kitchen photos. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "Let them come. I am not going anywhere." I stood up from the desk. My back ached. My eyes burned. But I felt stronger than I had ever felt in my life. I was not the mouse anymore. I was the trap. And they were about to walk right into me. The notification woke me up at 3 p.m. It was not an alarm, and it was not a text message from work. It was a Facebook tag. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, my body still aching from the shift at the clinic, and opened the app. The first thing I saw was a picture of my mother, Ruth. It was a selfie taken in her living room, the lighting carefully arranged to make her look pale and distressed, clutching a tissue to her nose. The caption was a masterpiece of weaponized piety. "Please pray for our family today. My heart is breaking in a way only a mother can understand. My daughter, Charlotte, has lost her way. Satan uses greed to blind even the sweetest souls. And I fear money has turned her against the people who raised her. She is trying to take advantage of her poor, sick grandfather's confusion to claim things that do not belong to her. It hurts so much to see your child choose property over love, but I am on my knees praying for her heart to soften." Prodigal daughter. Family, first prayers, needed. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. She had not just posted it, she had tagged me. She had tagged Aunt Vivian. She had tagged the pastor of our local church and half the congregation. I scrolled down to the comments. They were already pouring in. A landslide of judgment from people who had not spoken to me in years. "Oh, Ruth, I am so sorry. We are praying for her soul. This generation is so entitled. They do not understand the meaning of sacrifice. Stay strong. Ruth, the devil attacks the strongest families. I saw Charlotte at the grocery store the other day, and she looked dark. You could see the spiritual warfare in her eyes. I felt a physical blow to my chest. Dark. I had probably looked exhausted because I was working 60 hours a week to pay rent to the very woman asking for prayers. My phone began to buzz incessantly. Direct messages from distant cousins. People I had not seen since I was 10, asking me how I could be so cruel to my mother. A message from Mrs. Gable, my old Sunday school teacher, simply read, "Honor thy father and thy mother." Charlotte, wealth is fleeting, but hell is eternal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to type out a furious reply, to post the bank statements, to show them the $4,000 a month Ruth was stealing from the trust while I ate instant noodles. I started typing, my fingers trembling with rage. You people have no idea what you are talking about. She is stealing from me. My thumb hovered over the post button. Do not engage. Walter's voice echoed in my head. They will attack you where you are weakest. Your reputation. If I posted that comment, I would look exactly like the unstable, angry daughter Ruth was painting me to be. I would be playing her game, on her field, by her rules. I deleted the draft. I took a screenshot of the post and the comments instead. I sent them to Allison Rowe with a short note, Exhibit A. 10 minutes later, a new email popped up in my inbox. This one was from Aunt Vivian. The subject line was deceptively simple. A proposal for peace. I opened it. The tone was completely different from Ruth's hysterical public performance. It was cool, corporate, and condescending. Charlotte, your mother is very upset. I think things have gotten out of hand. We know you are struggling financially, and perhaps that stress is making you lash out. We want to help. Attached is an agreement. The trust is willing to increase your monthly household support allowance to $500 a month. This will help with your rent. In exchange, we just need you to sign a standard waiver acknowledging that you have no interest in the management or assets of Kane Residential. To prevent any confusion with Grandpa's estate planning, let us put this behind us. I forwarded the email to Allison and called her immediately. Do not sign that, Allison said before I could even say hello. I could hear the clicking of her keyboard in the background. I am looking at the PDF right now. Go to page 4, paragraph 2, subsection B. I opened the attachment on my laptop and scrolled down. The text was dense, single-spaced, and tiny. Read it out loud, Allison commanded. The undersigned beneficiary, I read, squinting, hereby irrevocably waives, releases, and discharges any and all rights, claims, or powers arising under Article 14.3 of the Kane Residential Charter, specifically the Tenant Proxy Clause, in perpetuity. There it is, Allison said, her voice dripping with vindication. They are offering you $500 to sign away a multi-million-dollar voting right. They are terrified. Charlotte, if they thought you were just a confused girl, they would ignore you. You do not offer a peace treaty to someone who has no weapons. They are trying to buy me off with my own money, I said, realizing the absurdity of it. $500. That does not even cover the rent increase Owen just gave me. It is not about the money, Allison said. It is about the signature. If you sign that, the 30-day clock stops. The game ends. They win. I am not signing, I said. I am printing this out to add to the file. Good, Allison said. But brace yourself. This was the carrot. Now comes the stick. The stick arrived an hour later. My phone rang. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again, 5 times in a row. Finally, the notifications stopped, and the voicemail icon appeared. I pressed play, holding the phone away from my ear as if it might bite me. Charlotte, Ruth's voice was thick with tears, the kind of ragged sobbing that usually made me drop everything to comfort her. Charlotte, please pick up. I cannot stop crying. Do you know what you are doing to this family? You are breaking the home you grew up in. Grandpa called the office today. He sounded so confused. You are stressing him out. Do you want to be the reason he has a stroke? Is money that important to you? Just call me. We can fix this. Just stop listening to whoever is poisoning your mind. My stomach twisted. The guilt was a reflex, conditioned into me over 27 years. Am I killing him? Is Grandpa actually sick? Then I remembered the Blue Lantern Diner. I remembered Walter's clear blue eyes, his steady hand, his sharp mind. He was not confused. He was the only one seeing things clearly. I saved the voicemail. I did not call back. The next day, the battlefield shifted to the one place I thought was safe, my job. I walked into Sunrise Animal Urgent Care at 10 in the evening for my shift. Usually, the night crew greeted me with tired smiles and jokes about the coffee quality. Tonight, the reception area was quiet. Sarah, the vet tech who usually shared her snacks with me, was organizing files. She looked up when I entered, then quickly looked down. Hey, Sarah, I said, putting my bag in the locker. How is the intake board looking? It is fine, she said shortly. She did not make eye contact. I walked into the break room. On the communal table sat a large plastic container of cookies. They were oatmeal raisin, my mother's specialty. Taped to the lid was a note on pink stationery. For the hard-working angels who take care of God's creatures. From a worried mom. I stared at the cookies. I felt like I was looking at a container of radioactive waste. Your mom came by today. The clinic manager, Dr. Evans, said from the doorway. I spun around. Dr. Evans was a kind man, but he looked uncomfortable. He was holding a chart, tapping it against his leg. She did? I asked, my voice tight. She brought the cookies, he said. She was, very emotional. Charlotte, she stayed for about 20 minutes. She was telling the day staff that she is worried about you. She mentioned you have been under a lot of financial pressure and that it might be affecting your stability. I felt the blood drain from my face. My stability. She said you have been having delusions, Dr. Evans said gently. About owning buildings, about conspiracies. Look, Charlotte, I know the night shift is hard. If you are burning out, if you need time off to get some help. I am not delusional, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. And I am not burning out. My mother is lying to you because I am in a legal dispute with her about a trust fund. Dr. Evans looked skeptical. It sounded crazy even to my own ears. The overworked receptionist having a legal battle with her sweet cookie-baking mother over millions of dollars. It sounded exactly like the kind of lie a delusional person would tell. Just keep it professional. Okay, doctor, Evans said, sighing. We cannot have family drama in the lobby, and if you need to talk to someone, there are resources. He walked away. I stood alone in the break room, staring at the cookies. She had come here. She had smiled at my coworkers, fed them sugar, and planted the seed that I was crazy. She was poisoning the well so that if I ever spoke up, no one would believe me. I took a picture of the cookies and the note. Then I walked out to the dumpster behind the clinic and threw the entire container into the trash. I called Allison on my break. She came to my job, I said, my voice shaking with rage. She told my boss I'm having delusions. Classic, Allison said. Her voice was calm, grounding me. This is step 2. Discredit the witness. If this goes to court or a board hearing, she wants to be able to say, my daughter is mentally unwell. Just ask her employer. She is building a narrative of instability. Everyone looked at me like I was a time bomb, I said. Let them look, Allison said. We respond with paper, not emotion. It is time to draw the line. Write the letter. I sat at the break room computer and typed. I did not use the apologetic, pleading tone I had used with my mother for my entire life. I channeled Allison to Ruth Carver and Vivian Holt. Effective immediately. I am ceasing all voluntary household contributions. I have retained legal counsel regarding my beneficiary status in the Kane Residential Trust. Do not contact me at my place of employment. Do not contact me via telephone. All future communication regarding my tenancy at Ridgeview Arms or my status in the trust must be directed to the office of Allison Rowe. Paralegal services. Any further attempts to disparage my reputation professionally or publicly will be documented as harassment. Sincerely, Charlotte M. Ross. I hit send. It felt like cutting an umbilical cord with a dull knife. It hurt, but it was necessary for survival. 2 hours later, Ruth posted again on Facebook. I forgive her, even though she has cut me off, even though she threatens her own mother with lawyers. I forgive her. A mother's love is unconditional. I will leave a seat for her at the table, no matter how far she strays. Unconditional forgiveness. Heartbroken. I read it in the break room. The anger that rose in my throat tasted like bile. It was the ultimate trap. If I attacked her, I was the villain. If I stayed silent, her narrative stood. She was using forgiveness as a sword. She is good, I whispered to the empty room. She is really, really good. Dev, Allison's tech specialist, sent me a text a moment later. I saw the post. Do not worry, I am archiving everything, every comment, every edit history. We are building the reputation attack exhibit. It shows a pattern of coordinated public humiliation. This actually helps us prove the hostile environment clause. It did not feel like help. It felt like being slowly suffocated by a pillow made of lace and scripture. But the real blow came the next morning. Dev had set up a script to monitor the Northbrook Living email server. He had found a vulnerability in their backup system. Owen Pratt was cheap and used a password that was just his dog's name plus the year. Dev sent me a screenshot of an email sent from Vivian to Owen at 3 a.m, from Vivian Holt to Owen Pratt. Subject, break her Owen. The peace offer failed. She is lawyering up. We cannot wait for the end of the month. Issue a new notice. Emergency maintenance fee, another $150. Tell her it is for the boiler. Make it due immediately. If she misses the payment by even 1 hour, start eviction proceedings. We need her out before the 30-day mark. If she is evicted, she loses the good standing requirement for the proxy clause. Break her. Owen, I do not care what it takes. I stared at the screen. Another $150. That would bring the total rent increase to $400 in 2 weeks. They were trying to drown me. I looked at my bank account. I had the money from the extra shifts I had picked up, but barely. If I paid this, I would have nothing left for food, nothing left for gas. I looked at the picture of my mother's forgiveness post again. Then I looked at Vivian's email ordering Owen to break her. Something inside me snapped, but it was not the snap of a breaking branch. It was the snap of a lock clicking into place. I had spent the last week terrified. I had been scared of their judgment, scared of their power, scared of losing the family I thought I had. But reading that email, seeing the raw, naked malice hidden behind their pious public masks, the fear evaporated. They were not family. They were predators, and they were scared of me. I typed a reply to Dev and Allison. Let them send the notice. I will pay it. I will sell my car if I have to. I will walk to work in the rain. But I am not leaving this apartment until I own it. I put my phone down and walked back out to the reception desk. Dr. Evans was there, looking at me warily. Charlotte, he said, are you okay? I looked him dead in the eye, for the first time in days. My back was straight. My hands were steady. I am fine, Dr. Evans, I said, my voice cool and clear. Actually, I am better than fine. I am just finishing up some business. The 30 days were not a sentence anymore. They were a countdown, and I was going to make sure that when the clock hit 0, I was the one left standing. 3 days later, the knocking returned. It was not the tentative tap of a neighbor borrowing sugar. It was the heavy, arrogant thud of a fist that knew it owned the wood it was hitting. I opened the door to find Owen Pratt standing there again. The hallway smelled of mildew and the cheap cologne he wore to mask the scent of the building's decay. He did not even pretend to be polite this time. He did not smile. He did not ask how I was doing. He simply held out another sheet of paper, stiff and crisp against the humid air of the corridor. Insurance premiums went up, Owen said. He was looking past me, into the apartment, scanning for boxes, checking to see if I had started packing yet. Corporate just sent the memo. Liability coverage across all Northbrook properties. We have to pass it on. I took the paper. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I read the number. It was another $150 on top of the $250 he had added 2 weeks ago. That brought my total rent increase to $400 a month. This is illegal, Owen, I said quietly. You cannot raise the rent twice in 30 days without a new lease agreement. Owen laughed. It was a dry, scratching sound. Read the fine print on your original lease. Charlotte, Clause 7, Section B, Variable adjustment for operational exigencies. We can raise it whenever costs exceed the operational baseline. Insurance is an exigency. He leaned in, bracing one hand against the doorframe, invading my space. Here is the reality, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was meant to be intimidating. The family wants you out. Vivian was clear. If you do not sign this addendum accepting the new rate within 48 hours, we are not renewing your month to month. You will have 30 days to vacate, and I will make sure every landlord in Ohio knows you are a high-risk tenant. He tapped the paper in my hand. Sign it or pack. It makes no difference to me. But if I were you, I would find a nice cardboard box. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing on the linoleum. I closed the door and locked it. I slid down to the floor, the paper crunching in my fist. $400. That was almost an entire week's pay. If I signed this, I would be spending over 70% of my income on rent. It was financial suicide. But I knew exactly what they were doing. It was a trap. If I moved out, I broke the chain of continuous tenancy required by Article 14.3. If I negotiated or asked for a reduction, I lost the status of being treated like a standard tenant. The only way to keep the weapon Walter had given me was to take the hit. I had to bleed to prove I was wounded. I pulled out my phone and dialed the private number. Walter answered on the first ring. Report? They raised it again, I said, staring at the water stain on the opposite wall. Another $150. They are citing insurance costs. Owen gave me 48 hours to sign, or he initiates eviction. It is a pressure test, Walter said. His voice was devoid of sympathy. Vivian is panicking. She knows the timeline is close. I cannot afford this, Grandpa, I said. I literally do not have the math. If I pay this, I cannot put gas in my car to get to work. Then walk, Walter replied. The bluntness of it took my breath away. What? You want me to tell you it is okay to quit? Walter asked. You want me to write you a check and make the bad men go away? I can do that. I can wire you $5,000 right now. You can move to a nice condo in the suburbs. You will be comfortable. You will be safe. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it felt heavy. But you will never sit at the head of the table. You will always be the girl they threw crumbs to. So you choose. Charlotte, do you want to be a good, quiet tenant, or do you want to be the one who writes the lease? I want to own the building, I said, the words tasting like iron in my mouth. Then find the money, Walter said. I cannot choose for you. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time. Then I stood up, smoothed out the crumpled notice, and walked to the kitchen counter. I signed it. Charlotte M. Ross. I would walk to work. I would eat rice. I would sell the few pieces of jewelry my father had left me. But I was not leaving. The next morning, the war followed me to the clinic. I arrived at Sunrise Animal Urgent Care 10 minutes early, ready to throw myself into the work. Work was the only thing that made sense. Animals did not lie. Animals did not manipulate trust funds. But as soon as I clocked in, the office manager, Brenda, called me into her office. Brenda was a nervous woman who disliked conflict, and she looked like she was about to be sick. Sit down, Charlotte, she said, not looking at me. I sat. Is everything okay? Did I mess up a chart? No, your work is fine, Brenda stammered. It is just, we have had some complaints from the community. What kind of complaints? I asked, my guard going up instantly. Well, she shifted papers on her desk. Several clients have called. They mentioned that you seemed unstable, distracted. One lady said she heard you were involved in a messy legal battle involving elder abuse, and she did not feel safe leaving her cat with you. My blood ran cold. Elder abuse. Ruth. Brenda, I said, keeping my voice calm. Who called? Was it a woman named Ruth Carver? I cannot disclose the names, Brenda said, but given the volume of calls, corporate is concerned about the brand image. We think it might be best if we scaled back your hours, just for a while, until your personal life settles down. Scaled back to what? I asked. Maybe 2 shifts a week? She suggested. 2 shifts. That was 18 hours. At $9 an hour. That was $162 a week. It would not even cover the new rent, let alone food. If they cut my hours, I lost my independent income status. If I lost my income, I violated the first condition of Article 14.3. Ruth did not just want to ruin my reputation, she wanted to starve me out of the clause. I reached into my pocket and quietly pressed the record button on my phone. "I want to be clear," I said, looking Brenda in the eye. "You are cutting my hours not because of my performance, which you just admitted is fine, but because of anonymous phone calls regarding my personal life. It is about client perception." "Charlotte," Brenda said, "we have to protect the business. May I see the written complaints?" I asked. "They were phone calls," Brenda said. "So there is no paper trail." I said, "Just hearsay." I stood up. "I'm going to finish my shift, Brenda, and I'm going to have my legal representative contact HR in the morning, because this sounds a lot like wrongful termination based on third-party harassment." I walked out before she could answer. My hands were shaking so hard I had to hide them in my scrub pockets. I sent the recording to Allison immediately. 20 minutes later, Allison texted back, "Got it. Drafting the letter to Sunrise HR now. I am citing the Ohio employment statutes and threatening a subpoena for their phone records to prove the calls came from your mother. They do not want a lawsuit. Charlotte, they will fold." She was right. By the next afternoon, I received an email from the regional director of Sunrise. They apologized for the miscommunication. My hours would not be cut. In fact, to make up for the lost shifts on the schedule, they were assigning me a high-priority block that no one else wanted. New Year's Eve, a double shift. From noon on December 31st to 8 in the morning on January 1st, it was brutal. It was exhausting, but it was hours, and hours meant money. Then came the twist. 2 days before New Year's Eve, a heavy cream envelope appeared in my mailbox. It was not mailed. It had been hand-delivered. I opened it in the hallway. It was an invitation, printed on thick cardstock with gold leaf borders. The Kane family. Annual New Year's Eve luncheon, December 31st, 12 o'clock noon, at the home of Ruth and David Carver. There was a handwritten note at the bottom, in Aunt Vivian's sprawling, aggressive script. "Charlotte, this is the most important meal of the year. We are discussing the future of the estate and the family roles for the coming year. If you are not there, we have to assume you are no longer interested in being part of this family. This is your last chance to show you belong. Do not let your pride cost you your inheritance." I stared at the date and time. 12 o'clock, noon, exactly when my shift started. It was surgical. Vivian knew I worked at the clinic. She probably knew my schedule better than I did. She had engineered a perfect collision. If I went to the lunch, I would have to call out of work. Calling out on a holiday double shift was an automatic firing offense at Sunrise. If I lost my job, I lost my independent income. The clause would fail. If I went to work, I would miss the mandatory family gathering. They would use my absence as proof that I had abandoned the family, that I was the one who walked away. They would spin the narrative that they reached out, invited me to the table, and I spat in their faces. It was a choice between my financial survival and my emotional standing. I took the invitation inside and placed it on my counter next to the signed rent increase. I called Allison. "They set a trap." "I see it," Allison said. "It is the classic loyalty test. If you choose the job, you are greedy. If you choose the family, you are powerless." "If I go to that lunch," I said, "I lose the job. If I lose the job, the 30-day clock resets." "Correct," Allison said. "So, what are you going to do?" I looked at the invitation. I thought about the years of sitting at the kids' table. I thought about the time-lapse video Dev had made, showing me standing in the background like a servant. "I am going to work," I said. "Good," Allison said, "but we need to document it. When you clock in on New Year's Eve, I want a photo of the time card. I want a photo of you in uniform. We are going to frame it not as you rejecting the family, but as you choosing responsibility." New Year's Eve arrived with a freezing rain that turned the roads into sheets of gray glass. I walked the 2 miles to the clinic because I did not have gas money. The wind cut through my thin coat, stinging my face, but the cold felt clarifying. I arrived at the clinic at 11:55. My hair was wet, my nose was red, and I looked nothing like the heiress to a real estate fortune. I walked to the time clock. I punched in. December 31st, 11:58 a.m. I took a picture of the screen. I sent it to Allison with a caption I chose. The shift was chaos. The holiday meant emergencies. Dogs terrified by early fireworks. Cats that had eaten tinsel. A hamster that had somehow ingested a watch battery. I spent the first 4 hours running from room to room, covered in fur and antiseptic, around 2 o'clock, during a lull. I sat down in the break room and opened Instagram. I knew it would be there, and it was. My mother's feed was a barrage of perfection. There was a photo of the dining room table, set with the good silver and the crystal glasses. There was the roast beef. There was the expensive wine. And there was the group photo. My mother, Aunt Vivian, my cousin, and Owen Pratt, who was apparently considered family now, were all raising their glasses, smiling wide, toothy smiles. They looked rich. They looked happy. They looked like they didn't have a care in the world. The caption read, "Family is everything." We are so blessed to be surrounded by those who value loyalty and love above all else. Sad that some choose to walk away from the light. But our table remains full for those who truly belong. New Year's Eve family, first no empty seats. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. It was the old instinct, the little girl inside me who just wanted her mother to look at her like that. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Dev. Look closely at the wide shot. He had taken the panoramic photo Ruth had posted on her story and run his analysis script. He sent me a zoomed-in version. At the far end of the table, there was a gap. The spacing of the chairs was uneven. There was clearly a spot where a chair should have been, but it had been removed to make the table look full. Dev. They removed the physical chair, but the geometry does not lie. There is a hole in that table. Charlotte. They can caption it however they want, but the math says they are missing a piece. I stared at the empty space in the photo. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to make it look like they didn't need me, but the gap was there, a gaping, invisible wound in their perfect picture. Charlotte, Dr. Evans called from the hallway. We have a Great Dane with bloat in exam 2. I need you. I looked at the picture one last time. I looked at the wine I wasn't drinking and the roast beef I wasn't eating. I looked at the people who were spending my money to celebrate their own cruelty. I turned off my phone. Coming, I yelled back. I stood up and tightened my ponytail. I grabbed a fresh pair of gloves. For the first time in my life, the exclusion did not hurt. It felt like protection. They were in that dining room, trapped in their web of lies and debts. I was here, smelling like wet dog and bleach, earning $9 an hour. But every dollar I earned today was a brick in the wall I was building around them. I walked into exam 2, ready to work. Let them have their lunch. Let them have their toasts. I was not missing out. I was preparing to foreclose. I walked out of the clinic at 8 in the morning on New Year's Day. The sun was blinding against the dirty slush on the roads, and my body felt like it was made of lead. I had worked 20 hours straight. I smelled like bleach and wet fur, and my hands were trembling from a caffeine overdose. But as I sat in the passenger seat of Allison's car, watching the gray Ohio landscape blur by, I did not feel tired. I felt like a loaded gun. Allison drove straight to the post office. She did not say a word. She just handed me a thick, heavy envelope. Do it, she said. I walked to the counter. I paid the postage to send the package via certified mail, restricted delivery, to the board of directors of Kane Residential Holdings. The clerk stamped it with a heavy thud that echoed in the quiet room. That sound was more satisfying than any scream I had ever held back. Inside that envelope was the bomb we had spent 30 days building. It contained my pay stubs for the last 6 months, proving every single dollar I earned came from scrubbing floors, not family handouts. It contained the employment verification letter from Sunrise, signed by a terrified HR director. It contained the lease for Unit 4B at Ridgeview Arms, along with the 3 separate rent increase notices Owen Pratt had taped to my door, and the most damning of all, It contained the trust documents listing me as the beneficiary of the very building that was bleeding me dry. We did not stop there. Allison sent digital copies to the corporate legal office by noon, while the rest of the world was nursing hangovers. The war had officially begun. Walter made his move an hour later. He did not call Ruth. He did not ask for a family meeting. He sent a formal letter to the board secretary. I saw a copy of it on Allison's laptop. It was terrifyingly brief. To the Board of Kane Residential Holdings, pursuant to Article 14, Section 3 of the Kane Residential Charter, I, Walter Kane, hereby formally acknowledge that the conditions for the tenant proxy clause have been met by the beneficiary. Charlotte M. Ross. Ms. Ross has demonstrated 6 months of independent income and has been subject to standard, and occasionally punitive, tenant conditions within a trust asset, effective immediately. I intend to transfer my proxy voting rights regarding all residential assets to Ms. Ross, pending ratification at the upcoming quarterly meeting. Sincerely, Walter Kane. The silence that followed lasted exactly 90 minutes. That was how long it took for the panic to set in at my mother's house. We knew they had received it because Dev, our tech specialist, triggered an alert on the shared server. "They are moving," Dev said, typing furiously. Ruth and Vivian just logged into the corporate portal. They are uploading a new proposal. Allison pulled it up on the big screen. It was a document titled Strategic Restructuring Proposal, Harbor Family Properties, LLC. "Look at the timestamp," Allison said. 1:35 in the afternoon. They drafted this in a panic. I read the summary. It was dense with corporate buzzwords. But the intent was clear as day. Ruth and Vivian were proposing to transfer the ownership of all residential buildings, including Ridgeview Arms, out of the Kane Residential Trust and into a new limited liability company called Harbor Family Properties. "Why are they doing this?" I asked. "Because the clause only applies to assets held within the trust," Allison explained, her voice hard. "If they move the buildings to a new company, the trust technically no longer owns the building you live in. Article 14.3 becomes void because you are no longer a tenant of the trust. You become a tenant of their new private company." "They are trying to steal the buildings," I said. "They are trying to launder the assets to strip you of your rights," Allison corrected. "It is desperate, and it is sloppy." Then, another email popped up. This one was from Aunt Vivian to Owen Pratt. Dev intercepted it from the backup server. Subject, "Hold her." "Owen, listen to me. Do not let her leave. If she moves out before the transfer is complete, we have a gap in the records. Keep her in Unit 4B for 2 more months. If you lose her as a tenant before we finalize the LLC transfer, you lose your management fees. I will fire Northbrook. Do what needs to be done." I stared at the screen. Do what needs to be done. It sounded like a threat from a mob movie, not an email from a suburban aunt who headed the church bake sale committee. "She is threatening him," Allison said. "She is squeezing the middleman. That is our opening." Allison opened her email client. She drafted a new message addressed to Owen Pratt, copying the legal department of Northbrook Living. "Mr. Pratt, we are in possession of correspondence instructing you to manipulate the tenancy of Ms. Charlotte Ross for the financial benefit of third parties. Furthermore, we are in possession of audio recordings dated November 12th, in which you discuss the misappropriation of the roof maintenance fund with Ms. Vivian Holt. Any attempt to harass, evict, or otherwise interfere with Ms. Ross's tenancy will be viewed as active participation in a conspiracy to defraud a trust beneficiary. If Ms. Ross receives so much as a noise complaint between now and the board meeting, we will release the audio file to the district attorney. Govern yourself accordingly. Allison Rowe, legal representative." "That should paralyze him," Allison said, hitting send. "Owen is a coward. He will not risk jail time for Vivian's commission check. He is going to go silent." She was right. Owen never replied. But the silence from the apartment management office was deafening. The threatening notices stopped. The maintenance inspections stopped. It was the stillness of a predator realizing it has walked into a cage. The board of directors responded that evening. These were not strangers. They were men and women who had built the company alongside Walter 40 years ago. They were serious people who cared about dividends and stability, not family drama. The board secretary issued a summons. An emergency session is called to review the restructuring proposal and the beneficiary complaint. Attendance is mandatory. Ruth realized she was losing control of the narrative. She could not bully the board, and she could not bribe them. So she went back to the only tactic she knew: character assassination. Over the next 2 days, she sent a flurry of private emails to the individual board members. Allison's team saw them all. Dear Harold, I am writing to you with a heavy heart. My father, Walter, is not himself. We fear he is being manipulated by Charlotte, who has been suffering from severe mental health episodes lately. She is unstable. Harold, she has cut off contact with her mother and is fixated on money. We are trying to protect the estate from her erratic behavior. The restructuring proposal is simply a way to safeguard the assets until she gets the help she needs. She was painting a picture of a senile old man and a crazy granddaughter, with herself as the noble protector of the legacy. If they believe her, I said, feeling a knot of anxiety in my stomach. If they think Walter is incompetent, they will vote down the proxy transfer. Walter knows, Allison said. That is why he's going out tonight. That evening, there was a small community event at the Harbor Falls Community Center. It was a fundraiser for affordable housing, a boring, low-stakes event that usually attracted local politicians and a few developers. Walter Kane showed up. He did not look like the frail recluse my mother described. He walked in with his cane, yes, but his back was straight, his suit was pressed, and his eyes were sharp. He shook hands. He remembered names. He asked specific questions about zoning laws. When the organizers asked him to say a few words, he walked to the podium. He did not use notes. Someone in the crowd recorded it, and by the next morning, the video had circulated through the entire business community of Harbor Falls. A house is not just an asset, Walter said, his voice deep and resonant. It is a promise. When we collect rent, we enter into a contract of care. If a landlord cannot treat their tenants with dignity, they have no business owning land. And if a landlord cannot treat their own family with fairness, they have no business having a family. He paused, looking directly into the camera, as if he knew Ruth would be watching. Integrity is not what you do when the board is watching. It is what you do when you think you are alone in the dark. I am here to turn on the lights. It was a masterstroke. In 2 minutes, he destroyed the senile narrative. He was lucid. He was powerful, and he was clearly in charge. The board members who had received Ruth's emails surely watched that video and realized they were being lied to. The mental instability argument began to crumble. Meanwhile, Allison and I were in the bunker, finalizing the weapon. We called it The Invisible Tenant. It was a 14-page presentation. It was not emotional. It was forensic. Page 1. The corporate structure showing the flow of funds. Page 4. The comparative lifestyle analysis: my ramen noodles versus Vivian's new SUV. Page 9. The timeline of exclusion, featuring Dev's time-lapse of the family dinners where I was erased from the table. Page 12. The roof fund fraud, linking the Apex Structural Solutions invoices to Vivian's P.O. box. The conclusion needs to be stronger, Allison said, pacing the room on the night before the meeting. You cannot just ask for the proxy. You have to tell them why you are the better choice. I am the better choice because I am not stealing, I said. That is the moral argument, Allison said. Business people do not care about morals. They care about risk. You have to show them that Ruth and Vivian are a liability. I looked at the screen. I thought about the damp walls of Ridgeview Arms. I thought about the single mother in Unit 3 who cried because the heat didn't work. They are a liability because they treat the product like a piggy bank, I said. They are letting the assets rot to fund their lifestyle. If they keep doing this, the buildings will be condemned. The trust will lose everything. Write that down, Allison commanded. I spent the rest of the night in front of the mirror in Allison's guest bathroom. I was wearing the only suit I owned, a cheap black blazer I had bought for a funeral 3 years ago. It was tight in the shoulders, but it would have to do. I looked at my reflection. I saw the dark circles under my eyes. I saw the tension in my jaw. I did not look like a polished executive. I looked like someone who had survived a fight. I practiced the lines Walter had told me to focus on. I am not here to ask for a free apartment. My voice wavered. I cleared my throat and tried again. Louder. I am not here to ask for a free apartment. I leaned into the mirror. I am here to prove that they turned me into a tenant in my own home. I imagined Ruth sitting across the table. I imagined Vivian's smirk. And from today, no one will ever do that to anyone again. I repeated it until the words lost their fear and became facts. I repeated it until I believed them. The notification came at 6 a.m. The meeting was confirmed. Location: Kane Residential Headquarters, 10th floor boardroom. Time 900 hours. The headquarters was a black glass tower downtown. It loomed over the city, visible from the kitchen window of my crumbling apartment at Ridgeview Arms. For years, I had looked at that building and thought of it as a fortress that kept me out. I had paid my rent, and that money had traveled up to that tower, disappearing into the sky while I stayed in the mud. Now, I was going inside. I packed the USB drive with the audio files. I packed the 14 copies of the presentation. I packed the signed copy of the rent increase notice that I had paid with my blood and sweat. Allison drove me to the tower. We pulled up to the entrance, and I looked up at the glass facade reflecting the gray morning sky. "Are you ready?" Allison asked. I touched the pocket of my blazer, feeling the hard plastic of the USB drive. "They think they are walking into a restructuring meeting," I said. "They are," Allison smiled. A sharp, dangerous smile. "Just not the kind they think." I opened the car door and stepped onto the pavement. I was terrified. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But under the fear was that cold, hard resolve that had been growing since the night in the storage unit. I was not the granddaughter anymore. I was the proxy. And I was coming to collect. The boardroom on the 10th floor of the Kane Residential Headquarters was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space of polished mahogany and black leather, smelling of expensive lemon polish and old money. One entire wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of Harbor Falls. I stood by the window before the meeting began, looking down. From this height, the city looked like a circuit board. I traced the gray line of Route 9 until I found it, Ridgeview Arms. From up here, the building that had been my prison for 3 years looked insignificant, just a small, brown brick rectangle surrounded by gray asphalt. I could almost see my own bedroom window, the one where the wind whistled through the cracks in the frame. I was standing in the sky, looking down at the hell I was still paying for. The heavy double doors opened, and the silence broke. My mother and Aunt Vivian walked in first. They were dressed for a coronation. Ruth wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my car, her hair coiffed into a helmet of golden perfection. Vivian was in sharp navy blue, holding a leather portfolio like a weapon. Behind them trailed a team of 3 lawyers I did not recognize, men with sharp suits and shark-like smiles. And then there was Owen Pratt. Owen looked like a man walking to the gallows. His cheap polyester suit seemed tighter than usual, and sweat was already beading on his forehead. He refused to make eye contact with me. He took a seat at the far end of the table, wringing his hands. Ruth saw me standing by the window. She paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before she smoothed it into a mask of pity. "Charlotte," she sighed, loud enough for the entering board members to hear. "I am surprised you came. I hope you are not going to cause a scene in front of Grandpa's associates. You look tired." I was tired. I was exhausted, but I did not say a word. I just walked to the side of the room where Allison Rowe and Dev were setting up their equipment. The board members filed in. These were serious men and women, gray-haired and grim-faced. They took their seats with the practiced ease of people who controlled millions of dollars. Finally, Walter Kane entered. The room went silent. Walter walked slowly, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the hardwood. He did not look at Ruth. He did not look at the lawyers. He walked straight to the head of the table, but he did not sit. He turned to the empty leather chair immediately to his right, the seat usually reserved for the vice chairman. He pulled it out. "Charlotte," Walter said, his voice filling the room. "Sit." Ruth's lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Sterling, cleared his throat. "Mr. Kane, with all due respect, that seat is for board members. Ms. Ross is here as an observer. The guest chairs are against the wall." Walter did not look at Mr. Sterling. He looked at me. I said, "Sit, Charlotte." I walked past my mother. I could feel the heat of her glare on my skin. I sat down in the heavy leather chair. It was comfortable. It felt like a throne. Walter sat down and placed his hands on the table. "Begin." Mr. Sterling stood up and began his pitch. It was a smooth, rehearsed speech about modernization and protecting the legacy. He used words like synergy and liability shielding. "The proposal before you," Sterling said, gesturing to the thick packets his team had distributed, "is to transfer the residential assets of the Kane Trust into a new entity, Harbor Family Properties, LLC. This will simplify the tax structure and remove outdated clauses from the charter that no longer serve the family's best interests. Specifically, we aim to remove legacy restrictions that hamper efficient management." He was talking about Article 14.3. He was trying to kill the clause by killing the trust itself. "This is about moving forward," Ruth chimed in, her voice trembling with performative emotion. "My father built this company, but he is getting older. We need to protect him from confusion. We need to ensure the assets are managed by those who have the family's true interests at heart, not by antiquated rules that can be exploited." A board member, a woman with steel-gray hair named Mrs. Higgins, adjusted her glasses. "You are referring to the tenant proxy clause. It is a loophole," Vivian said sharply. "It was written 20 years ago. It has no relevance in today's market. We are simply closing it to prevent instability." Walter leaned forward. "Counselor," he said to the board's attorney, a man named Mr. Vance who sat at the opposite end, "please read the text of Article 14.3 for the record." Mr. Vance opened the blue binder in front of him. Article 14, Section 3. If a direct lineage beneficiary is residing within a trust property and is subject to standard tenant lease agreements, rent collection, and lack of management authority, said beneficiary may claim full voting proxy if they can demonstrate 6 months of independent income and documented proof of adverse treatment. "Exactly," Vivian said. "Independent income. Charlotte works at a vet clinic. She makes minimum wage. That is hardly the kind of financial independence the clause was designed to require. It implies wealth. It implies capability." Mr. Vance looked up over his reading glasses. "Actually, Mrs. Holt, the text does not specify the amount of income. It specifies the source. It states income derived outside of any Kane family enterprise. The intent is to prove autonomy, not wealth." Vivian's mouth snapped shut. "Thank you," Walter said. He turned to me. "Charlotte?" I nodded to Allison. Allison Rose stood up. She did not look like the high-priced corporate lawyers on the other side. She looked like a street fighter in a blazer. She walked around the table, placing 3 thick, color-coded binders in front of each board member. "My name is Allison Rowe," she said. "I represent Ms. Charlotte Ross, and we are not here to discuss restructuring. We are here to discuss theft." "Objection!" Mr. Sterling shouted. "This is a board meeting, not a criminal court." "It will be if you do not sit down," Walter said quietly. Allison opened the first binder. "Exhibit A," she said. 6 months of pay stubs from Sunrise Animal Urgent Care, verified by the HR department. Every dollar Ms. Ross has lived on since July has been earned scrubbing floors and cleaning cages. She has received zero financial support from her family. She flipped the page. Exhibit B, the lease agreement for Unit 4B at Ridgeview Arms, signed by Owen Pratt. She pointed to Owen, who flinched. And 3 separate notices of rent increase issued in the last 90 days. Ms. Ross is currently paying 40% above the market rate for a unit with documented mold and heating failures. Ruth let out a scoff. We treat her like any other tenant. That is fairness, not abuse. She should not get special treatment just because she is family. Fairness, Allison asked. Let us look at Exhibit C. She signaled to Dev. The lights in the boardroom dimmed. On the large projection screen at the end of the room, a video began to play. It was the time-lapse Dev had built. It started 5 years ago. The family Thanksgiving. The camera panned across the table. There was Ruth, laughing. There was Vivian, pouring wine. There was the empty chair. And there, in the background, blurred and out of focus, was me. I was washing dishes. I was serving the pie. The photos cycled faster. Christmas, Easter, 4th of July, birthday parties. In every single image, the table was full. But I was never seated. I was always standing, always serving, always on the edge of the frame. Then, the video cut abruptly. The silence of the dinner photos was shattered by the grainy footage from Mark Ellis's hallway camera. The sound of Owen Pratt's voice filled the boardroom, distorted but unmistakable. You are 1 day late, Ross. I do not care if your check has not cleared. I want the late fee, $50, cash, now, on screen. I was shrinking back against my door, looking terrified. Owen, please, I get paid tomorrow. Not my problem. You pay or I put a notice on your door telling the whole building you are a deadbeat. The video ended. The screen went black. In the boardroom, you could hear a pin drop. Mrs. Higgins looked from the screen to Owen Pratt with an expression of pure disgust. That, Allison said, her voice cutting through the dark, is how the family treats the beneficiary of the trust. He was doing his job, Vivian snapped, though her voice lacked its usual bite. Tenants need discipline. If we let one slide, they all slide. Discipline, Allison repeated. Is that what you call it? She picked up the small USB drive from the table, the one labeled Roof Fund. She plugged it into the laptop connected to the room's sound system. We recovered this audio from a digital recorder inadvertently left running during a meeting between Mrs. Holt and Mr. Pratt at the Rusty Anchor Bar on November 12th. Vivian went pale. She stood up. You cannot play that. That is private property. That is illegal recording. It was recorded in a public space. Mr. Vance, the board attorney, said calmly, Play it. Dev hit the spacebar. Vivian's voice boomed through the speakers, slurred and arrogant. Worried? Why would I be worried? Owen, she is a mouse. A frightened little mouse. Owen's nervous laughter followed. She asked about the increase. Viv, she was crying. She said she is broke. Then Vivian again. Colder this time. She is not going anywhere. She thinks she is lucky we let her live there. Just keep squeezing her. Owen, increase the rent. Tell her it is the market. She will pay it. She would rather starve than disappoint her mother. Keep the books clean. As long as she pays. The IRS sees it as a legitimate rental. The audio cut off. Owen Pratt had his head in his hands. Vivian was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. Ruth was staring at the table, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Mrs. Higgins turned to Owen. Mr. Pratt, she asked, her voice like a whip. Can you confirm that was your voice on that recording? Owen looked up. He looked at Vivian, who was staring daggers at him. Then he looked at the board members, the people who could end his career with a phone call. Yes, he whispered. Yes, it was. And did Mrs. Holt instruct you to raise the rent specifically to extract money from Ms. Ross? She said we needed to show revenue. Owen stammered. She said Charlotte would pay anything. Enough. Ruth slammed her hand on the table. Tears were streaming down her face now. but they looked different than the ones on Facebook. These were tears of panic. "She is my daughter. We were teaching her responsibility. She has always been terrible with money. We were holding it in the trust to protect her. We are the ones sacrificing here." "Sacrificing?" Allison asked. "Let us talk about sacrifice." She clicked the remote. The screen changed to the final slide. The Comparative Lifestyle Index. It was a split screen. 2 columns, 1 red, 1 green. On the left, under Ruth and Vivian, the list scrolled down like a receipt for a billionaire's weekend. Cabo San Lucas Resort, $7,000, funded by Trust Distribution. Range Rover lease, $1,200 monthly, funded by Trust Distribution. Kitchen renovation, $45,000, funded by Trust Maintenance Budget. On the right, under Charlotte. The list was pathetic. Rent, $850, paid to Trust. Rent increase, $250, paid to Trust. Medication, $12, paid out of pocket. Instant noodles, $3, paid out of pocket. "This is not a family dispute," a board member named Mr. Henderson said, his voice shaking with anger. He was an old friend of Walter's. "This is embezzlement. You are looting the maintenance funds to remodel your kitchens while the buildings rot." That money was for household support. Ruth cried, "We support Charlotte. We give her guidance. You stole $24,000 for a roof repair that never happened," Allison said, reading from a paper in her hand. "We checked the permits. No contractor ever stepped foot on the roof of Ridgeview Arms." Ruth turned to me, her eyes wide and desperate. "Charlotte, stop this. Tell them I love you. Tell them I am your mother. You are choosing money over family. You are choosing poverty just to play the victim." Allison picked up a piece of paper from the pile. "Actually, Ruth, you answered that question yourself." She held up the email Ruth had sent to Vivian, the one Dev had intercepted. "From Ruth Carver to Vivian Holt." Allison read, "Keep her there. The longer she stays in that dump, the easier it is to prove she has no head for asset management. If she leaves, we lose our leverage. Make sure she stays poor." Ruth collapsed back into her chair. The silence in the room was absolute. The mask had not just slipped, it had shattered. I stood up. My legs felt steady. I walked over to the laptop and unplugged the USB drive. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a second drive. "You talk about the family legacy," I said, looking at Ruth. "You talk about how much you sacrifice, but you do not see what you built." I plugged in my drive. The screen lit up with a video I had taken just 2 nights ago. It was a shot of the Ridgeview Arms hallway. The fluorescent light was flickering, casting frantic shadows on the peeling paint. The camera panned down to my hand, holding the eviction threat Owen had handed me. Then, the camera moved to the window at the end of the hall. Through the grime-streaked glass, in the distance, a massive digital billboard lit up the night sky. It was an advertisement for Kane Residential. It showed a happy family sitting in a golden living room. The slogan faded in, "Huge and bright Kane Residential Homes with Heart." The camera zoomed in on the billboard, then pulled back to show the mold growing in the corner of my hallway, the water stain on the ceiling, and the eviction notice in my hand. The irony hung in the air like smoke. Homes with Heart shining down on a slum run by the same people. I turned to the board. "I did not come here to ask for money," I said. "I did not come here to ask for a better apartment. I came here to prove that the people sitting across from me have turned me into a tenant in my own home." I looked at Walter. He was watching me, his face unreadable, but his hands were clasped on the table, steady and strong. "And from today," I said, my voice echoing in the glass room, "no one will ever do that to anyone in this family again." I sat down. Mrs. Higgins closed her binder. She looked at Ruth and Vivian with cold, final judgment. "I move to vote on the activation of the tenant proxy clause," she said. "And I move to immediately suspend all executive powers of Ruth Carver and Vivian Holt, pending a full forensic audit." "Seconded," Mr. Henderson said instantly. Ruth let out a sob, but it was too late. The gavel had already fallen. Mr. Vance, the board attorney, closed the blue binder with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He removed his reading glasses and looked directly at the chairman. Mr. Henderson. Mr. Chairman, Vance said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. I have reviewed the evidence presented by Ms. Rowe alongside the stipulations of the Kane Residential Charter of 2001. The requirements for Article 14, Section 3 are unambiguous. He held up a finger. First, the beneficiary must demonstrate 6 months of independent income derived outside of family enterprises. Ms. Ross has provided notarized payroll records from Sunrise Animal Urgent Care for the last 26 weeks. He held up a second finger. Second, the beneficiary must provide objective documentation of adverse treatment comparable to or exceeding that of a standard tenant. The video evidence of harassment by the property manager, the audio recordings of intent to defraud via the roof fund, and the comparative lifestyle audit satisfy this condition beyond a reasonable doubt. Vance placed his hands flat on the mahogany table. It is the legal opinion of this council that the tenant proxy clause is valid and active. Ruth let out a sharp, ragged breath. This is a technicality, she hissed. You are twisting words to steal authority from the rightful trustees. Walter Kane did not even look at her. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single, folded envelope. He placed it on the table and slid it toward the corporate secretary. This is not a proposal, Walter said. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of 40 years of leadership. I sent this via registered mail 3 days ago. It is a formal transfer of my proxy voting rights for all residential assets to Charlotte Ross, effective as of 9 o'clock this morning. The secretary opened the letter, scanned it, and nodded to the chairman. It is in order, sir. The transfer is registered. The air in the room shifted instantly. I was no longer just a plaintiff asking for justice. I was a voter. I held the keys. Mr. Henderson turned his chair to face me. For the first time since I had walked into the building, he did not look at me with pity or curiosity. He looked at me with respect. Ms. Ross, he said, before we move to the vote regarding the suspension of Ms. Carver and Ms. Holt from their management duties, do you have a statement? I looked at Ruth. Her face was a mask of terrified fury. She looked like a queen who had just realized her castle was made of cardboard. I looked at Vivian, who was frantically typing something on her phone, likely trying to move money that was already frozen. I stood up. I did not need notes. I do not want to talk about the money, I began. My voice was steady. The audit will handle the money. I want to talk about the hallway. I paused, letting the image of the moldy corridor sink in. For 3 years, I stood in that hallway every month, shaking, holding a check for $850. I was terrified that if I was late, I would lose my home. I called my mother crying, begging for help, and she told me to pray. She told me I was a burden. She told me I had to sacrifice for the family. I looked directly at my mother. She flinched. While she was lecturing me on morality, I continued, my rent check money I earned cleaning cages on the night shift was being transferred into her account to pay for her heated seats and her vacations. She was not just watching me drown. She was holding my head under the water and charging me for the pool. I turned back to the board. I do not need a free apartment. I do not need a handout. What I need is a structure. I need a company structure where no one is allowed to call me a burden while they are living on my back. I sat down. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. Thank you. Ms. Ross? He turned to the room. The motion on the floor is the immediate suspension of Ruth Carver and Vivian Holt from all executive and signatory duties regarding Kane Residential Trust assets, pending a full third-party forensic audit. All those in favor? Aye, Mrs. Higgins said, her hand shooting up. Aye, said the man next to her. Aye, said the secretary. The votes rippled around the table. 7 hands went up. Then, Mr. Henderson turned to me. Ms. Ross, as the proxy holder for the founder's shares, How do you vote? The room went deadly quiet. This was the final seal. I looked at the empty chair where I was supposed to sit at the family dinners. I looked at the slide on the screen showing the disparity between my poverty and their luxury. I said. The motion carries, Mr. Henderson said. The gavel hit the table with a dull thud. Ruth stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward. You cannot do this, she screamed. I am his daughter. You are listening to a girl who scrubs floors. She is destroying this family. She is destroying my father's reputation. Mrs. Higgins adjusted her glasses and pointed a remote at the screen. The image of the billboard appeared again, the glowing sign above the slum. Ruth, Mrs. Higgins said, her voice like ice water. Look at that slide. The slogan is, Homes with Heart. And you had your own daughter living in squalor while you embezzled the maintenance budget. Charlotte did not destroy the reputation of this family. You did. By the way you treated your own blood. Ruth opened her mouth to argue, but no sound came out. She looked at Walter, pleading. Dad. Walter looked at her with eyes that were incredibly sad, but completely resolved. I gave you a trust to protect your children. Ruth. You used it to eat them. Sit down. She sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Vivian, always the pragmatist, did not scream. She leaned forward, her shark-like survival instinct kicking in. Fine, Vivian said, her voice tight. You have made your point. We made administrative errors. We can fix this quietly. We will reimburse the roof fund. We will return a portion of the excess distributions. There is no need for an external audit. That will just spook the investors. Let us settle this inside the room. It was a bribe. She was trying to buy her way out of the scrutiny. No, I said. Vivian snapped her head toward me. Excuse me? No settlement, I said. No backroom deals. The motion was for a forensic audit. That means every receipt, every invoice, every email. For the last 10 years. Charlotte, Vivian said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do you have any idea what that will do if they look at everything? They might find irregularities that go beyond just the roof. She was admitting to tax fraud. She was terrified. Then you should have thought about that before you tried to evict me for an extra $150, I said. The audit proceeds, Mr. Henderson confirmed. There will be no private settlements. He then turned his attention to the end of the table, where Owen Pratt was trying to make himself invisible. Mr. Pratt, Henderson said. Owen jumped. Yes, sir. As of this moment, the management contract with Northbrook Living is terminated for cause. Henderson said, You are removed as the property manager of Ridgeview Arms immediately. Security is waiting to escort you from the building. We will be forwarding your correspondence with Mrs. Holt to the district attorney to determine if your collusion constitutes criminal fraud. Owen's face went gray. He stood up, his legs shaking so bad he knocked his knee against the table. He looked at Vivian, waiting for her to save him. She did not even look at him. Please, Owen stammered. I was just following orders. The family, they told me. The family, Walter interrupted, is sitting right here. And we never gave you permission to abuse a tenant. Get out. 2 security guards stepped forward and guided Owen out of the room. He didn't look like the arrogant landlord who had sneered at me in the hallway anymore. He looked small. Now, Allison Rowe said, standing up again, we have one final item of business. She distributed a single sheet of paper to the board members. Ms. Ross and Mr. Kane have drafted a new amendment to the trust charter, Allison said. We are calling it the open door policy. I watched the board members read it. The clause was simple. No asset, resource, or property held by the Kane Residential Trust shall be used to exclude, manipulate, or financially coerce any direct lineage descendant. Access to family housing is a right of the beneficiary, not a tool of leverage for the trustee. It meant that never again could a mother threaten to kick her child out on the street to teach them a lesson. It meant that never again could a dinner table have a deliberately empty chair. This prevents the weaponization of shelter, Walter said. It ensures that what happened to Charlotte and what happened to David before her stops with this generation. I move to adopt the amendment, Mr. Henderson said. Second, Mrs. Higgins said. All in favor. Every hand went up, including mine. Motion carries, Henderson said. The charter is amended. The meeting was adjourned. The air in the room felt lighter, as if a heavy pressure system had finally broken. Ruth and Vivian did not move. They sat at the table, surrounded by their expensive leather portfolios, looking utterly defeated. They had not lost their money yet that would come later, when the auditors finished tearing apart their shell companies, but they had lost something far more valuable to them. They had lost the ability to make the rules. They could no longer decide who sat where. They could no longer decide who was a burden and who was worthy. They were no longer the gatekeepers of the Kane legacy. They were just subjects of an investigation. I stood up and gathered my files. I walked over to Walter. He did not hug me. That was not his way. But he placed his hand on my shoulder, and the weight of it felt like an anchor in the storm. You did well, he said quietly. I had a good teacher, I replied. I turned to leave. My mother looked up at me. Her mascara was running, staining her cheeks with black streaks. You ruined everything, she whispered. Are you happy you embarrassed us in front of the whole city? You destroyed the family name. I looked at the slide on the screen one last time. Homes with heart. No, Mom, I said. I just fixed the roof. I walked out of the boardroom. The glass doors closed behind me with a soft whoosh, sealing the noise and the anger inside. I walked down the long corridor toward the elevator. My steps were quiet on the plush carpet. I checked my phone. There was a notification from the bank. Automatic transfer rent payment. Cancelled. For the first time in 3 years. I did not have a knot in my stomach. I was going back to Ridgeview Arms. But I wasn't going back to hide. I was going back to clean house. I drove back to Ridgeview Arms not as a woman terrified of finding an eviction notice taped to her door, but as the person who now held the pen that signed the leases. The drive was short, but the distance I had traveled since that morning felt like light years. When I pulled into the lot, I saw Owen Pratt's car. He was still there, likely trying to scrub his hard drive or shred documents before the auditors arrived. I walked into the on-site management office. The door, which had always been a barrier between me and my dignity, was unlocked. Owen was standing behind the desk, frantically stuffing files into a cardboard box. He froze when I entered. He looked at me, his eyes darting to the door as if he expected the police to be right behind me. Ms. Ross, he stammered. The name sounded foreign in his mouth. For 3 years, I had been Charlotte, or Hey You, or Tenant 4B. Now, I was Ms. Ross. The shift in power was so palpable it almost had a temperature. Leave the box. Owen, I said. My voice was calm. I did not need to yell. The board resolution I held in my hand screamed loud enough. These are personal effects, he said, clutching a stack of folders that looked suspiciously like tenant complaints. Leave it, I repeated. You are suspended effective immediately. The locks are being changed in an hour. Until then, you are to touch nothing. You are to speak to no one. He dropped the files. They slid across the cheap laminate desk, spilling papers everywhere. I need you to hand over the master keys, I said. And then I need you to show me where you keep the ignored maintenance requests, the ones you and my aunt thought were too expensive to fix. Owen reached into his pocket and placed the heavy ring of keys on the desk. He looked small. He looked like a man who realized that his entire career had been built on bullying people who could not fight back, and he had finally picked a fight with the wrong person. I hope you know what you are doing, he whispered, edging toward the door. This building is falling apart. It is a money pit. It is a home, I said. Get out. He left. I stood alone in the office, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee and neglect. I picked up the keys. They felt heavy in my hand. That evening, I did something that had never happened in the history of Ridgeview Arms. I called a tenant meeting in the lobby. Usually, the lobby was a place people rushed through to avoid making eye contact. The lights flickered, and the carpet smelled of damp wool. But tonight, every resident was there. They had seen the security guards escorting Owen out. Rumors were flying. I stood on a sturdy wooden crate I had dragged down from the storage room. I was still wearing my cheap funeral blazer. I looked at the faces of my neighbors. There was Mrs. Garcia from 2A, holding her toddler. There was Mr. Henderson from the first floor, who walked with a walker and had been complaining about the front steps for 5 years. There was the single mother from 3C, who I had heard crying through the vents. They looked at me with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. To them, I was just the girl from 4B who drove a rusted sedan and worked weird hours. "Hi, everyone," I said. My voice echoed in the high-ceilinged space. "My name is Charlotte. I live in 4B, and as of this morning, I am the acting proxy for the ownership of this building." A murmur went through the crowd. "I know you are worried," I continued. "I know you think this means another management company is coming in to raise the rent and ignore the leaks, but that is not what is happening." I held up the letter from the board. "Effective immediately. All rent increases issued in the last 12 months are frozen. If you are currently paying a higher rate based on a recent notice, that money will be credited back to your account pending a review. If you received an eviction threat from Owen Pratt based on those increases, tear it up. It is void." The room went silent. People were too stunned to cheer. "The roof fund, that many of you were told was the reason for the hikes, is real," I said. "But starting tomorrow, the money is actually going to be spent on the roof, not on vacations, not on bonuses. We are bringing in independent contractors to assess the mold, the boiler, and the windows, and we are setting up an anonymous hotline for complaints that goes directly to the board of directors, not the property manager." A hand went up in the back. It was the single mother from 3C. Her face was tired, her arms crossed defensively. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice sharp with skepticism. "Are you sure they are not just going to wait a few months, repaint the lobby, and then jack up the prices again? That is what they always do. They give us a crumb and then take the whole loaf." I looked at her. I knew that fear. I had lived with that fear every single day for 3 years. "I cannot promise that the world is going to be perfect," I said. "But I can promise you this. No one is going to do that to you in the dark anymore. Not while my name is on the paperwork. I live here. If the heat goes out in your apartment, it goes out in mine. If they raise your rent unfairly, they have to look me in the eye to do it." She held my gaze for a long moment, then slowly nodded. It was not total trust, but it was a start. While I was holding court in the lobby of a crumbling apartment building, a very different scene was playing out in the financial world of the Kane family. The audit had begun. It was not a dramatic raid with sirens and handcuffs. It was quieter and much more painful. It was the sound of credit cards being declined. Ruth and Vivian had been stripped of their signatory powers. That meant the corporate accounts they used as their personal piggy banks were locked. I heard later from Allison that Vivian had tried to pay for a spa treatment at her club that afternoon, only to be told by a very embarrassed receptionist that her card was invalid. Ruth was bombarded with emails from the forensic accountants demanding receipts for business expenses dating back to 2015. Every invoice for a consultation that was actually a lunch with friends. Every site visit that was actually a trip to a winery, it was all being dragged into the light. They were not going to jail. Walter did not want his daughters in prison, but they were facing something they feared far more than a cell. They were facing irrelevance. They were facing a life where they had to ask for permission to spend money. They were facing the structural revenge of a system that had finally been calibrated to stop them from cheating. Walter sent me a package 2 days later. It contained a single sheet of thick cotton paper. It was titled Principles of Housing. He had written a note at the top for the charter. Make sure they never forget. The text was simple. A home is a sanctuary, not a lever. No member of this family shall use the provision of shelter as a weapon to coerce, control, or punish another. The security of the roof is inviolable. Regardless of the disputes at the table, I sent it to the legal team to be permanently enshrined in the trust's bylaws. It was Walter's legacy, but it was my victory. I kept my job at the vet clinic. Allison told me I didn't have to. The stipend for the housing proxy role was significant enough to move to a condo downtown, enough to buy a new car, but I went back to my shift. When I walked in, the dynamic had changed. The email from corporate had gone out. Sunrise Animal Urgent Care had signed a partnership with Kane Residential to provide low-cost veterinary services to tenants in our affordable housing units. My name was listed on the press release as the lead consultant. My coworkers didn't look at me with pity anymore. They didn't look at me like I was the crazy girl with the unstable mother. They looked at me like they were trying to figure out how the girl who scrubbed the kennels was also signing deals with the CEO. I scrubbed the kennels anyway. I liked the work. It kept me honest. It reminded me that no matter how much power I had in the boardroom, there was still shit that needed to be cleaned up. And sometimes, you just had to put on gloves and do it yourself. A week later, I walked into my apartment at Ridgeview Arms after a long shift. The hallway was different. The flickering light had been replaced. The smell of mildew was fading, masked by the scent of fresh primer where the painters were treating the water stains. There was no paper taped to my door. There was no threat. There was just a flyer announcing the new tenant council meeting and the number for the 24-hour maintenance line. I walked inside. The apartment was still small. The floorboards still squeaked, but it felt different. It felt secure. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up. It was a text from my mother. I hadn't heard from her since the board meeting. I expected an apology, or maybe a plea for help with the auditors. Instead, the message was short, bitter, and designed to hurt. Enjoy your victory. But remember, the seat you chose to sit in is very cold. You will be lonely at the top. I hope it is worth it. It was her last attempt to haunt me. She wanted me to feel isolated. She wanted me to regret trading her false warmth for my cold independence. I looked around my living room. I looked at the cracks in the ceiling that I was finally going to fix. I looked out the window at the black glass tower of Kane Residential, reflecting the orange glow of the setting sun. I was alone. Yes, but I wasn't lonely. I was free. I typed my reply. I am used to the cold. Mom, but at least this time, I know who controls the thermostat. I hit send. Then I blocked the number. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a month later. Allison sent me an email with the subject line, "It is done." Attached was a photo of the slide deck from the final ratification meeting. The board had voted unanimously to adopt the open-door policy for all trust assets, but the real victory was in the photo attached to the bottom of the email. It was a picture taken in the main boardroom at Kane Residential, on the mahogany wall, right next to the portrait of Walter Kane. A new plaque had been hung. It was made of simple, polished oak. The engraving was deep and clear. No one in this family will ever be treated like a tenant in their own home again. It was a warning. It was a promise. It was the law. I drove to the headquarters that afternoon. I took the elevator to the 10th floor. The receptionist nodded to me not as a guest, but as an executive. I walked into the boardroom. It was empty. The view of the city was sprawling and bright. I walked to the head of the table. Next to Walter's chair, there was a heavy leather seat. On the back of it, a small brass plate had been affixed. Charlotte M., Ross Housing Proxy. I sat down. The leather was cool and firm. I opened the file in front of me. It was a report on another building in the portfolio, a complex in the South Side where tenants were reporting unfair fees. I picked up my pen. I wasn't alone anymore. I had Walter, I had Allison, and I had the thousands of people living in our buildings who needed someone to watch the door. My revenge wasn't about destroying my mother. It was about building a world where she couldn't exist. And as I signed the first order to audit the South Side complex, I knew I had already won. I was the landlord now, and the rent was finally fair. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed Charlotte's journey from being an invisible tenant to the owner of her own destiny. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below. telling me which country or city you are listening in from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel to connect us. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more satisfying tales of justice and family drama, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.